Hi, everyone. I'm Tina Holland, and welcome to First Friday Lunch. First Friday Lunch is a vlog that I do once every month, every Friday, the first Friday, and usually we pick a topic to discuss around writing and publishing. So this month's topic, I put a poll out on the Writers and Garden Creative Cluster on Facebook, and the poll was between community and self-care. And community overwhelmingly won, not by a whole lot, but for that group, that's what they wanted to talk about. And I'm not very surprised given the status of what's going on in RWA that was a topic. So next month in March, we will be talking about self-care. So just so you know, we haven't let that one go. We'll talk about it next month. So on to talking about community. So I think right now, because of what's going on in RWA, and I'm not going to go into the whole thing because you can find out enough and make decisions on your own based on Twitter, Facebook. If you're a member of RWA like I am, you can see the form and stuff like that. So I myself am still currently an active member, although I don't know if I'm going to maintain that membership or not, so we'll see. But what I'm going to talk about is community and as it relates to writers. And in my opinion, there's three types of writing communities. There's in-person, there's online, and then there's also publishing communities. And when I'm talking about publishing communities, I'm talking about belonging to a community where you are in a community with your other published authors within the same house. At least that's how I'm looking at it. But it could be like if you're a small indie press, it could be related to belonging to a group of people where you all indie press or all self-publish or whatever. So because those needs are different a little bit. So anyway, let's break these down. So I belong to all three of these. So in person, I belong to a group called Fargo Moorhead Word Weavers, and it's based out of Fargo Moorhead, and we meet at the library twice a month. And so that's mostly of romance writers. I found my fellow romance writers on member forums, and one was also published with the same publisher I was published with. So that's a mix of published and unpublished writers. And basically what we do is we meet to basically critique, talk about the business, like who's doing what, who's publishing, those sorts of things. And we critique each other's work. And that's been invaluable. And we, commiserate over rejection letters or, find out who's pitching to agents or participating in these pitch fests that are going on and that sort of thing. So that's one of the in-person groups I belong to. Not as active. There's also a Moorhead Friends of the Library writing group, which is public. So if you live in the Fargo Moorhead area and you are looking for a writing group and don't necessarily write romance, that might be a group for you. And so they meet once every 2 weeks as well, and they also do critiques. So, but I'm not quite as active with that one. So, but I do follow them on Facebook and so forth. So. Okay, so that's the first group, is like an in-person group where you get together and maybe you do writing sprints, maybe you just talk about the business, maybe you have coffee, maybe you do like this where you have lunch once a month and you just chat about whatever is going on. So, and yeah, actually when RWA also has land chapters. And from what I've heard from most people, North Dakota doesn't, I don't think, have enough romance writers to have a land chapter. At least I've never seen one in the whole many years I've been with RWA. So, but from what I've heard from people that have a land chapter, so those are people that physically meet once a month or whatever their schedule is, those are invaluable and they make lifelong friends and they connect with people. So I think having an in-person group, regardless of the genre you write, there's something about sitting down face to face and talking to another writer about business, craft, and writing in general. Like if you're blocked, those sorts of things, and having like cheerleading teams, there's something invaluable about that as writers, because writing as a general rule is a solitary investment. So it's interesting when you can get together with other writers and find out, even if they're necessarily in the same genre, that's something that can be invaluable. So that's the first group. The second group is online groups. And there have been numerous online groups that have popped up on Facebook, There's or blogs, you can follow blogs, but mostly there's a lot of online groups. I'll do some links to some of the ones that I belong to down below when I'm done with the video here. But on Facebook, off the top of my head, there's Writers and Garden, who sponsored this video. Thank you very much. And there's also All the Kissing. What are some other ones? The Moorhead Friends Writing Group, Writers and Garden Creative Cluster. There's a bunch of them. So, I mean, honestly, all you would have to do is go ahead and put in writing in Facebook, and you would probably find a group that appeals to you or whatever. So that's one way to join a group. Plus, there's other memberships like Horror Writers of America, Science Fiction Writers of America, Savvy Writers, Marketing for Writers, Romance Divas. I mean, there's a lot of writing groups online, and it's pretty easy just to search and find what you're looking for. So that's the second group. And then the third group, publishing group, and this is where authors, not necessarily sponsored by the publisher, but belong to a group. And I was in two of these. Resplendence Publishing, one of my publishers had a Resplendence Authors group. Although the editors were moderators on there. And then another group that I've been with, Liquid Silver Publishing, which was my first publisher, they also had a group where I think one or two editors, there weren't as many editors involved on that Facebook group as were the writers. But, we would talk about promotion, we'd talk about books that were coming out, we'd talk about who was working on what. But it was a really good resource. Well, Resplendence closed in November of 2018, and it was pretty easy. Everybody got their rights back and stuff like that. Liquid Silver Books, the owner, Linda, died just last fall, actually in like October. And one of the things was I was in the process of getting all my rights back anyway, because my sales had dropped significantly. But one of the things that had come out of that is Linda didn't have a will in regards to what was going to happen with the company. And so there's been a lot of concern about what's been going on in that environment. And so a group of authors got together and created an LSP resources page where we could talk to each other and say, this is what I've got going on. How do I go about getting my rights back? And so we walked and we had a few people with legalese, that knew the business and knew the law. And so they were able to help those of us that didn't know that through that process. So that's the kind of thing when I talk about publishing community. If you've had groups where you've had certain publishing houses fold and you've had issues with either getting your royalties or getting, your rights back or something like that. Like if you think of Alora's Cave or Sam Hain, I'm sure those authors, I was never an author for either one of those publishing houses, but I'm sure those authors got together as groups and were able to, communicate with each other what they needed to do, who was doing what, how to get your rights back, how to get your royalties if you were owed royalties, and again, keep other authors updated on the status so they kind of knew maybe where they were in the queue. So that's where I think that the publishing, like belonging to, if you're with a house, especially a small house, but maybe even a bigger house, because I guess when Dorchester folded years ago, maybe there was an online group for the authors, or maybe they just knew each other. I don't know. But I think when there's a community and you connect with your other authors when you're in a house, it doesn't necessarily give you leverage or anything like that. But if something were to happen, you can kind of have this group of people that are in the same boat that you are. It's like if like one of your parents dies, you have a sibling, and you have a sibling, there's somebody that's in the same boat as you. You've got similar backgrounds, you've got similar feelings towards your parents, maybe, whatever. But I mean, it's just, there's a commonality there that can be very helpful when times of stress come on, that maybe if your critique group or your online group maybe can't relate to unless that author's in the same house. So, and in a lot of ways too, sometimes that can get, they kind of want to know the scoop, but they're not really in the same boat as you are. So it's not necessary, the advice they give you may not necessarily be the same as somebody who is in the exact same boat as you. So those are kind of the three groups, the way I've broken them down, just because that's the way I look at them. So that's the way I belong to groups or whatever. So that's kind of the basic of how I've decided to pick groups. So I did have a couple questions on the Writers and Garden cluster about writing groups specifically. So let me just find them. So how do you find an in-person writing community? And this was asked by A. Catherine Noon. This is a very good question. So if you're sitting at home right now and you're writing a book, or you're newly published or whatever, and you're trying to find an online or trying to find an in-person community, there's three really good ways to do this. First of all, I would check on Meetup and put in there a writer group or whatever, and see if there is a writing group near you. And by the way, these are like free options. So so that would be one way to do it, is to go on a Meetup and then put in kind of writing group, critique group, whatever you're looking for. And I would do that. The other thing is Facebook. There are online writing groups on Facebook that also have events. So like, even as word weavers, we have events, and the Moorhead Writing Group has events. And so there's groups that have events as well, that can connect you to other authors in your area. The third place I would look would be libraries. Like if you have a library and you could go to your library and basically say, do you have or a bookstore? Those would be two, like in person, to see if they have like a group that meets there. Usually if they do, it's usually a public group, or almost always around Nano, there are writing groups that will kick up in December, because people got together either at the library, the coffee shop, the bookstore, and did like sprints. And then usually in December, January, you'll see writing groups pop up. But I would talk to your local library. And the other thing is, even if your local library doesn't necessarily have a writing group, maybe they've had people ask about it, and maybe you could start one at your local library. So I'm in the process of working with a library, not in Fargo-Moorhead, but closer to where I live, because I live outside of the city, but there just hasn't been interest. But I've approached the librarian a couple times, so we'll see what happens with that. But so those are some places that you can go ahead and look for. Also, if you write in a genre like mystery, sci-fi, whatever, I think they have local land chapters, and you could go ahead and go and look out there and see where their land chapters are. And I think with RWA, you could attend the first few meetings free for some of them, so you could go and see if you liked it, if that was your thing. So and that might depend on the size of your city as well. So those are some basic places where you can find an in-person community. The next question is, what's the best way to build an online community? So I think if you're going to build an online community, if you can't find what you're looking for, you should kind of break down what your needs are. Are you trying to finish a book? So do you really need a writing community that gets together and does like writing sprints? Did you finish manuscript and you need help critiquing? So you maybe want to do that. Developmental edits prior to, so maybe you're looking for a critique group. Maybe you're looking for both. I know our girl Word Weavers does both. We do writing sprints at our meetings, and then we also critique stuff for people that are, trying to submit or basically get through their first rounds of edits before they send it to an editor or an agent. So, or the other thing is, are you published? Are you looking for a publishing community? So if there's something out there that doesn't meet your needs in either Facebook or in one of the major organizations, and you're looking for something different, you could create that group on Facebook. If you're an author, you can have an author page and your regular page, whatever I do. And so you could create your own community if that's what you decide to do. But you do have to decide, I think, when you go to create an online community, what's it going to be? Is it going to be critiquing? Is it going to be supporting your other writers. There are writing groups out there that are strictly for marketing, like just to post and say, this is what my book's about. And there are writing communities that are not like that at all. They want to stick to craft, business, support cheerleading, but they don't necessarily want you to tell them every 2 weeks your book's on sale. So you have to look for those types of things. I will say this, when you belong to a writing community, it does not necessarily mean that you are looking for a fan base. If that is what you are looking for, you should create an author page and build a fan base. That's a different ball of wax, because writers will love your work, but they're not necessarily going to buy your work. I mean, they're not necessarily going to be purchasers of your work. So if you belong to a writing community that's like 500 members, you can't join and assume that all 500 members are going to buy your book. That's not to say that some of them won't. Some of them may. Some of them may have been your fans before they even joined. I've done that myself. I read my fellow writers' works because I like them as people, and I tend to buy stuff that way. Like, I'll try reading your genre, even if I don't, or whatever, even if that's not something I normally read. But sometimes I become a fan of their work and I just keep reading it. But that's not going to be true of everybody in the writing group. Some people are just there to learn their craft. They're there to learn about the business. They're there to get support for their own writing, and they're not necessarily going to purchase your writing. So if you're looking at it as a way to build fans, that's not the way to do that. Just build a fan page, and that's going to be a much easier process and probably less disappointing. So that being said, writers do tend to support writers when the works come out. Like, even on my own blog, if you wanted to do an interview with me, we would do that. I do spotlights. I mean, so there's way to support writers, but not necessarily purchase their books. So, but to help them kind of get out there. So writing groups don't necessarily do that for people. So unless it's designed that way, there are groups that are totally designed that way, like Marketing for Romance Writers is one I can think of. And I'm sure there are many more. So I think there's a book promo one on Facebook. So there's ways to get around that. So, and then what are ways a person can give back as part of a community? I do think if you're going to belong to a community, you can't be like, if you're going there for one thing, like when I first joined my local critique group, we met basically to meet other writers. That was kind of it, because North Dakota has so few writing communities. Now there's many more. I recently attended, every year I attend the North Dakota Library Conference. And this year I was the liaison. And so I connected there. I found 5, 6 writing groups across the state that I didn't even know about, but I found them all on Facebook. So Facebook's kind of a good place to start to find a writing group. But I found them on Facebook, and we connected in Fargo because that's where the conference was this year. Next year it'll be in Minot. But we connected. And so it was nice to put that out into the community. So there's ways to find groups, but what I can say is giving back as part of the community. Part of me giving back was to track down these other writers for this library conference. And when we formed our local critique group, it was mostly just to connect with other writers. And sometimes that's your goal. But once you do that and you figure out how you're going to proceed within the writing community, if it's a group that meets to cheer people on, that's what you need to do. That's going to be your way of giving back, helping people finish their projects. If it's critique, you do critiques. Be honest, but don't be brutal if that's possible. And you kind of need to find a little bit too where other writers are at when you're doing that critique process. You need to find out where other writers are at. Can they take something brutal? By the time I joined my writing group, my local writing group, I was already published. So I'd already been through editors that slashed letters and stuff. So I could take a pretty harsh critique, So, and also I think it depends on the writing group. If you have a mix of genres, like if you have a literary fiction writer telling a sci-fi fantasy writer, you need to work on this and this and this, you got to kind of take it with a grain of salt. Unless it's grammatical, the genres are slightly different. So there's different tolerance levels for phrasing, dialogue, language within a genre. They're very different. So, what a reader wants in sci-fi fantasy is not necessarily what a reader wants in literary fiction. So, those are some differences. But you can give back in critiques. You can give back by supporting your fellow writers. You can. I think that once you've progressed as a certain stage of an author, I don't want to say you're obligated to give back, but you really should. It's karmically good to give back to your other writers. And you should not, I think one of the easiest things you could do is just don't give people bad advice. I've seen so many times where writers will give bad advice because out of jealousy, out of not really caring about the other person's career. I mean, readers are voracious. I mean, there is enough room to play on the playground for everyone. You do not have to put down another writer. So it's unnecessary in the sense of, buy my work instead of theirs. You don't have to do that. So if they're behaving badly, that's a whole different subject. But as far as my work is better than so and so's work, I don't think that's necessarily good. It's one of the reasons I actually don't do reviews. A lot of writers do reviews. I don't, because I don't. Well, for one thing, I like reading the writers I read. I will recommend that you read writers that I love just because I love them. But if you don't, it's no skin off my back if you don't. But I don't want to get into the reviewing part of it because I just don't know that I could. I don't know that I could. If I don't like something, I just put it down and I just don't recommend it. And that's the most I'm going to do to a writer. So, but I don't think I would say, for God's sakes, don't spend your money on that book. I know people that do, I just don't. So that's a personal choice. So there's nothing wrong if that's what you want to do. but I would never do it but if you do it, I would never do it in the sense of, don't buy this book because my book is better. Don't ever do that. It seems like a karmically bad to me. So, but, yeah, so I think just as a way to give back to communities is just really invest, support people. I think when you get a certain distance in your community, you should help other writers make it. There is a problem in the sense that. So I was always with small press publishers. They're getting very small these days. There's not as much playing room in the small press playground because they can't really break even when working with authors that are self-publishing. So the advice that I give may not be as relevant as somebody that published maybe a year ago. Because I started my career 15 years ago. So, and I'm still playing in the same pond. I haven't been able to break into traditional publishing, and I'm playing in this very small pool that's getting smaller. So, but the advice that I necessarily give a writer with the best of intentions may not be as good as somebody that self or indie published a year ago, especially if they're going the indie published route. My advice may not be as good. So, I think knowing what your limitations are when you give advice is a good thing. But if you have, if I met an author who's if they're like me and they don't want to self-publish because it's just I don't want to find a cover artist. I don't want to find an editor. I don't want to do all the marketing. I don't want to, that's when I look at it. That's what I see. And that is no problem for some people, but I struggle just to write the book sometimes that I don't necessarily want to invest time and money learning those skills when I can just hand it off to somebody else. So to me, that's worth it. So, and basically, I guess in a lot of ways, I'm probably paying on the back end what people pay on the front end. So it's not to say I would never do it, but if I did, I'd be looking for advice from somebody who had done it for much longer than I have. So anyway, so those are kind of the three topics or whatever. And then if you have any other questions, I don't think anybody does. I've got one viewer. Thanks, whoever you are. So I think that's kind of all I have. So I got my corporate overlap over here. He's been napping the whole time. So he's probably like, get back to work writing, Tina. Okay, I will. So I guess that's all I have on communities. But I would say I think that a lot of people are looking for writing communities right now, especially people that are leaving RWA, and they have whole local chapters that are leaving as well. So it's a very sad time right now. So, but I think that given maybe the next few months, we'll see how that all shakes out, and maybe that'll be a community that people can be a part of, or maybe they're going to have to find something different. So I do think that when you go to look for community, you need to know what your needs are, and leverage that against what the community has available to you. So next week is there are a number of communities that are doing stuff. All the Kissing is hosting Kiss Pitch on Twitter, and Savvy Authors is hosting a pitch fest as well. So that might be a chance for a lot of you to look into some online communities, especially for all the Kissing if you're in romance. And then I believe Savvy Authors takes like all genres. So I think you can be a member for free, but then they have premium membership where you get free classes. Oh, that's something to look at as well. When you are looking at communities, a number of communities will do craft classes, and Savvy Authors is one of them. I believe Romance Divas does classes. Writers and Garden does classes. We have part of a creative cluster where we do classes. So, and I think that that is something that RWA did very well, is that they would house online, in person, and then the national conference. So if those are things that you're interested in, I mean, those are the types of things you should look for. So, but yeah, there's basically, in my opinion, there's in person, online, and then if you join a group of like published writers, or a group of writers published with the same house or the same type of genre, or just because you can really work as a connective team together. So yeah, I will say that during the incidences where I've had publisher issues, my fellow writers have been invaluable. Even when Resplendence closed, and that was very, very smooth. It was pretty upfront that they were going to close. They took their site down immediately, so sales weren't happening while they were closing or whatever. It was very, in my opinion, clean. And I don't have any. We all got paid at the end of the year, or I did anyway. I haven't heard complaints from others, but maybe there were people that weren't paid. But I remember talking to my fellow authors, and what are you going to do? Are you going to keep this? Are you going to do that? Where are you going to go with your books? And those sorts of things. So I think that having connectivity to other published writers that are similar to you, either genre, in publishing, in maybe how you write, similarities that way can be invaluable. So I know with my online critique group, because we had 3 published romance writers with 3 different houses, when we would critique each other's work, a lot of times it would be stuff that we had been trained by our editors to catch. So it was really interesting to see how we could critique each other's work. And then the other thing is once you're at that level, you can kind of say, hey, you can take or leave this, but I know that my editor hates all I would always critique work of one of my fellow authors, and I'm like a horrible, get rid of the that's, get rid of the has, So I think that if you have like a mix in a good way, but then commonality, it works really, really well, and it can help balance you as a writer. And then another thing is when things go horribly, horribly wrong, when you are getting bad reviews, when you get a bad critique, when in a lot of sense, when you have family drama, like I've had family drama this last month and a half, your fellow writers can be very supportive in that, because if you're not getting on the page and you're not writing, they're like, well, what's going on? And is there anything we can do to help? And, they're really, really good that way. So I think that, and with both my online group, with Writers and Garden, and with my in-person group, although I do meet some of the founders every year, So I know them in person as well. But there's friendships there that are invaluable, and that'll happen over time. It won't happen within, the first week of you joining a writing group, but those friendships will happen over time, and they end up holding usually. So even if you leave publishing companies, or somebody um, drops out of writing altogether, there's been a lot of that too, because some people just suffer burnout. So but you maybe maintain that friendship even if they're not part of the group anymore. And I've went way over time talking about community. So, but it's not an easy subject. So, for finding a right group and finding the right mix. So, but if you're looking, there are places to look online. I will list below some of the online writing groups that I'm aware of, and then also a couple of the Facebook groups that I've seen. But really, honestly, all you have to do is a search, and you can probably find what you're looking for. So, next month, we are going to be talking about self-care, and I'm just going to grab the date here, and that will be on March 6th. So we'll see you next month, Friday, March 6th. Pencil me in for lunch. Thanks. Have a good day, you guys.